U.S. coordinator of the U.S. Palestine Committee,
Palestinian Community
Network. And Hatem and I have known each other for over a decade now, which kind of ages us and makes us feel old. And we went to Palestine together back in 2002, which is part of what got us in this mess, I think. But I think we're happily here together. And he's here to talk about both the repression of the FBI against the work around Palestine and Palestine solidarity, but also the struggle to free Palestine. And he's going to be talking about that work for the next about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we're going to have some discussion about that work. So please welcome Hatem Abudayyeh.
Thank you very much. I'm flattered that this room is full, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy that it's 30 degrees out. I thought I was a tough Chicago boy until a few years ago when I came here in February and it was like 30 below. So I was expecting the same this weekend, but luckily it's more like the balmy Chicago weather. An talked about our long-standing friendship and our work in the movement. We went on a delegation in 2002. That delegation was organized by the Palestine Solidarity Group in Chicago, an organization that I helped co-found. And although we don't begrudge at all anybody else who does solidarity delegations to Palestine, there are a lot of different ways in which people do it. There are a lot of different styles and political viewpoints as to how to do solidarity work. But ours were very clear. Ours were very clear because what we said was we living in the United States in the belly of the beast, and our work is here. Even the Arab Americans and the Palestinian Americans amongst us, that our work was here. So we didn't jump in front of any tanks, and we didn't protect anybody's homes, and we didn't stand in front of any olive trees. The Palestinians, with all due respect, don't want us to do that. The Palestinians understand very clearly that it's U.S. empire and imperialism that keeps Israel afloat, and they want us here to keep chipping away at that U.S. empire in partnership with the Palestinians fighting their liberation struggle at home. The other thing that An might have told some of you in here, she's been telling this story for like 10 years, that it was a 2-week, very, very intensive delegation, and we would go all the way to the top of the West Bank and down to the south. We actually made it into Gaza. That was the last delegation of the PSG that had a chance to get into Gaza in 2002. And we went inside 1948 Palestine. So we would visit Haifa, we would look at the apartheid conditions for Palestinians inside Israel. Went to Haifa, we went to the areas where we call them the unrecognized villages that don't get any water or electricity from the Israeli government. We went to the areas where they call the destroyed villages. These are the ones in 1948 that were essentially wiped off the map and all that sort of thing. And so On for 10 years has been telling a story about how I never fed her, that like we would go for 9, 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour days and she would never eat. But for those who have been in Palestine, there's a damn falafel stand at every corner. So there's no way that you wouldn't be able to eat if you wanted to eat. Anyway, again, thank you to An and to the Anti-War Committee and to the Committee to Stop FBI Repression for hosting. You are all my friends. You've been my friends for a long, long time. And I'm really, really honored to be here. We want to talk about the struggle in Palestine. We want to talk about the struggle in the United States in support of Palestinian self-determination. There was a lot of excitement. There was a ton of fascination, more media interest in this observer status situation in the UN for Palestinian statehood than we normally see in the case of Palestine support work. But in all honesty, it doesn't really mean that much today, because only a few days, a few weeks after all of that pomp and circumstance, we went back to the current objective conditions in Palestine, which look very much the same and maybe even worse today. Fatah is still ruling in the West Bank. Hamas is ruling in Gaza, and Israel is continuing its daily crimes against the Palestinian people, continuing to expropriate land, continuing to demolish homes, continuing its collective punishment, continuing its imprisonment now of over 7,000 political prisoners, including many who are held as administrative detainees without any charge. And Netanyahu, the prime minister, is in the process of building a coalition government. Now, Israel is very much like a number of European states in terms of how it must build its government. After the elections, the person who gets, the party who gets the most votes and the most seats in the Knesset has to then build a coalition government. And I wrote for Fight Back News a few years back, calling his first government, his first victory as the prime minister, and the coalition government he built at that time, maybe the most right-wing, for Israel that's saying a lot, maybe the most right-wing government that it's ever had. But in all honesty, this year's is going to be even worse. The parties that he's in negotiations with right now are some of the most rabid right-wing. I mean, it wouldn't be inaccurate to call them fascist parties. One of them is led by a son of American Jews who were settlers in Palestine. And he's developed and proposed plans to further apartheid-like conditions for the Palestinians, pushing more and more out of Jerusalem, not allowing others to return even to the West Bank. The question of the right of return for the Israelis is always an existential one. The right of return to what is now called Israel, what the Palestinians called the 1948 territories. They say there's no way they would let Palestinians return to the 1948 territories, as if it's their right to let us return or not. But Bennett's new plan is saying that folks can't even return to the West Bank, whereas previous Labor Party leaders, even Likud leaders at times, have said, all right, well, we'll let a couple 100,000 come back. Everybody knows we're close to 7 million, at least 5, maybe as many as 6.5 million refugees. And our demand is the right of return for all of them to the homes and lands from which they were exiled. That means the homes and lands in 1948 Palestine. That means the homes and lands in 1967 Palestine, the West Bank. And Bennett is saying, we won't even let them return to the West Bank. This plan would also annex 60% of the West Bank. So we know that out of 100% of historical Palestine, in 1948 when Israel was founded, essentially it took over 78% of that. 22% was left over, was the West Bank and Gaza. Since Oslo and since the building of Jewish-only bypass roads and the continued settlement building and the continued land expropriation, now the space, the area in which they're saying that the Palestinians can establish their state is less than 22%. And this fascist wants to annex 60% more of that West Bank. Securing full control over the rest of it. So annexing 60 and then having security control over the rest of the 40. And then essentially saying Gaza is Egypt's problem. We don't even want it. We don't even want to administer its occupation. And this is a plan that he has already brought to the fore of Israeli society. And this is the person that Bibi Netanyahu is falling all over himself to try to build a coalition government with. So it's very important for folks to understand when there's discussion about the peace forces in Israel, those peace forces are there. Those are legitimate forces, and we would hope they would be stronger. But understand that they're not very strong. They're probably the weakest that they've been in Israel in its existence. and they're facing now the most right-wing challenge from Netanyahu and the others who he's building a coalition government with. Meanwhile, the siege on Gaza continues unabated. Unemployment is over 75%. Water and electricity, families get it once every couple days in Gaza. And then there's, of course, the occasional, and sometimes more than occasional, drone, missile, and other strikes that are regular occurrences in Gaza every day. But we know that there is an issue that unites Palestinians. The issue in which you have a governing force in Gaza and a governing force in the West Bank. Most of the discourse is about this contradiction between Hamas and Fatah. I'm here to tell you that that is not the only contradiction in Palestinian society, and it's not the only discourse in Palestinian society. There are other forces that are legitimate forces in the Palestinian polity, and those forces are in conversations as well. Unity discussions between Hamas and Fatah and the leftist organizations, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and the Islamic Jihad. These forces are working together and talking together because there are conversations not just in Palestine, not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but all over the world about the reformation of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Now, Palestine Liberation Organization to some people means the 1964 formation of the PLO and what it meant back then. Of course, Hamas was not around back then. Of course, the Islamic Jihad was not around back then. The PLO that the Palestinian people understand needs to be built and reformed and reestablished is a PLO that does what the old PLO did, which is to represent every social sector in Palestinian society, every political force in Palestinian society, the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and inside 1948 and in the diaspora. So a Chicago boy who's a Palestinian American feels as if this is his sole legitimate representative, just like the refugee in the south of Lebanon, the refugee in Syria, and the Palestinian who's in Ramallah. That's what Palestinians across the world are talking about. So that unity is being built day by day, step by step, a very difficult unity, but it is in discussion, it is part of the discourse, and it is what most Palestinians believe the only way forward for our national liberation. And the reason why we believe that is because forget observer status at the UN, we are not in a state building stage. Forget the Oslo agreements of 1993 in which some people felt that we were in a state building stage and it's time to establish our state structures. That's not where we are. We are still in the national liberation stage, and the only way to win national liberation is the unity of all the political forces in Palestine fighting against Israeli occupation every single day. And so what issue today is the one that sort of binds us, the one that is uniting us, the one that everybody is talking about and everybody is trying to support? And that one is the political prisoners. As people know, Samir al-Isawi is on his 216th day, I think, of hunger strike today. Now people hear I heard the numbers, and it was just obviously, unbelievable and flabbergasting. But just to set the record straight, the brave Irish prisoners of the H Block strikers who died when they were in the 50s and 60s in terms of the number of days of their hunger strike, they weren't drinking any salt or eating any salt. The Palestinian prisoners, the reason why we see 180 days and 190 and Samir up to 215, 216 is because they do take water and they do take salt. But it's still an incredible, brave and heroic movement that is permeated throughout the prisons today. Samir is currently uncharged. Now, for those who may not know, the Israelis have a statute on their books in which they can administratively, what they call administratively detain Palestinians, which means they can pick up a young man or a young woman or an old man or an old woman from their home and put them in prison for up to 3 months without any charges. And then after the 3 months, they can go back to the military court and get a renewal for another 3 months, and then they can do it again. And then they release people for a couple days, and then they bring them back. You hear of people who have been in prison, Palestinian prisoners, for years without formal charges. Right now, currently, he's uncharged. And others that have been on strike for months and months as well. There are a number of others who have been on strike for 150, 160, as many as 180 days on hunger strike. And then a solidarity strike broke out with hundreds more who went on hunger strike after Asawi went to his hearing a few days ago and wasn't released. He did receive a release order, but people need to know what that means. That release order came from the civil courts, and that release order said that he would be released on March 6th. But he still has to go to a military court. So he has not ended his hunger strike because he knows that at the military court they might not release him and they might extend it. Now, USPCN, United States Palestinian Community Network, the Palestine Solidarity Group, Committee to Stop FBI Repression, and a number of others had a call-in day last Wednesday in support of Samir and calling for his release. We bombarded the President's office and the Office of Near East Affairs at the State Department. A number of people who called and talked to the operators at the Office of Near East Affairs were told that thousands of people had been calling over the past few weeks. And the folks in the office have actually also claimed, I don't know whether we believe it or not, but they're claiming that they are talking to their counterparts in Israel and talking to them about this public opinion in the United States. So although it's not a grand gesture, and I think we have to come up with some campaign steps in which we push the envelope a little bit on the prisoners issue. It is important work. USPCN is calling for another call-in day on Monday and for a week of actions. I know San Francisco, New York, DC, and other places are already planning for protests at Israeli consulates next week, and maybe the folks here in Minnesota can do something as well. That issue of prisoners is always a unifying one. So at this time when people are talking about reforming the PLO, people are talking about reestablishing the Palestinian National Council, which is the legislative body historically for the PLO, this is a good time for that to happen. And I think that's going to continue to happen in Palestine as we look to see the developments around the hunger strikes. Now, there is repression that we are seeing in Palestine, and obviously that repression is related to the fact that the Palestinian national movement is going strong, is not giving up, is continuing to fight against occupation, for the right of return, for self-determination, and for full equality. That repression we've seen from the Israelis for decades, and we've known it from the Israelis for decades. But we also know the repression in the United States against the Palestinian community. Some of you may know some of that. Some of you definitely know the history of repression in this country in a general sense. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and other law enforcement mechanisms have been trying to repress the Palestinian national movement in the United States for many years. As you know, An mentioned that I am one of the 23 activists who was subpoenaed on September 24, 2010 to a federal grand jury. My home was raided that morning along with the home of a colleague in Chicago, and 5 homes here, and an office, the office of the Anti-War Committee, in fact. 23 of us, all within a day, got together. I'm sorry, 14 of us on that first day got together within a day and said publicly to the press and to the world that we were not going to testify at the grand jury. We were not going to answer any questions about our political work, answer any questions about our First Amendment protected activities, answer any questions about our colleagues and our friends and our families. Now, I'm the only person of the folks who got raided who hasn't had his materials returned. The U.S. Attorney's Office still has a lot of the files and the phone numbers and the addresses and the names that they took from my home. And we've asked continuously to get those materials back. We've asked continuously for them to end this investigation. It's been over 2 years, almost 2.5 years, to end this witch hunt and end this investigation and publicly exonerate us, and they refuse to do so. So we need to keep chasing after that U.S. Attorney's Office. Barry Jonas, who is an assistant U.S. attorney there, is going to pop up in Chicago on March 12th and decide to teach a class at DePaul University about prosecuting terrorism in the courtroom. And we're going to be there, and we're going to prosecute him for terrorizing our communities. Now, one bit of legalese that I think is important for folks to know, a bunch of you might already know it, but I'm going to spend a couple minutes on it because I think it's important to understand. When folks hear the concept or even the phrase material support, you think about material support to most people means money. It means, like the lyric of the famous song, lawyers, guns, and money. Well, there are no guns and there is no money. Right now, the Humanitarian Law Project versus Holder, a test case in 2010 in which the HLP went to the Supreme Court and said, if we decide that we're going to go to Turkey and work with the Kurdistan Workers' Party and help them and train them to bring their grievances against the Turkish government to the International Criminal Court. And if we go to Sri Lanka and work with the Tamil Tigers and train them to bring their grievances against the government of Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court, if we did that, strictly legal advocacy, strictly court advocacy, strictly legal training and support, would that be considered material support for a designated foreign terrorist organization? Because the Tamil Tigers and the PKK are both on the State Department list of terrorist organizations. And in a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court said yes, that could be considered material support for a foreign terrorist organization. So now material support is not just money. Now material support could be speech, material support could be advocacy, material support could be the support for the national liberation struggles in Palestine and in Colombia and in the Philippines and in a lot of other places around the world. And that is what we believe we're facing. That is what we think the investigation against us is regarding. And we really, really want to thank everybody in this room and the thousands of people across the country and the world who have come out in support for us and say there is absolutely no crime in saying that you support the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. There's no crime in saying that you support the Colombian peasant struggle against the terrorist government there. And it's important that we continue to have your support until we get Barry Jonas and whoever's going to be named in Fitzgerald's stead as the U.S. Attorney, and Eric Holder and everybody else at the DOJ to drop this investigation and let us move on with our lives. We have moved on with our lives on one level, which is that we've continued to organize and we've continued to fight. And not only are we doing defense work 24 hours a day, but not one of us has stopped doing any of their Palestine support work, any of their Palestine solidarity work, any of their Colombia solidarity work. And it's because we know we have the support of folks in this room and people around the country. The historical repression is, why does it happen in general? It happens because the U.S. government is not interested in social justice. The U.S. government does not want to see communities of color, oppressed communities, working people move forward in life, move their communities forward, bring social justice to those communities, because that means less profit for the people in charge in this country. And because of that, when the Black Panthers are establishing self-defense units and breakfast programs for their children in the most devastated communities in this country in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, then the FBI goes and infiltrates and devastates that organization and the Black liberation movement as a whole. And they do the same with the Chicano rights movement, the Brown Berets. They've done the same with the Puerto Rican independence movement. The Puerto Rican independence movement in this country has faced more grand juries than any other community in this country, the folks fighting for Puerto Rican independence. Not only the Puerto Ricans and the Black liberation movement and the Brown Berets, but the American Indian movement, of course, women's liberation movement, environmental rights, queer rights, all the social justice movements have all been attacked by the FBI and the Department of Justice and law enforcement in this country because they're doing effective and impactful work. And that's what we believe is happening today to the Palestinians. Because the Palestinians in this country are doing effective and impactful work, we're coming under attack from the FBI and the Department of Justice. It's not a post-September 11th phenomenon. It's not a September 24th, 2010 and beyond phenomenon. This has been happening to our community since we first began immigrating here in masses after the '67 occupation. Most of the exile of Palestinians, 750,000 who were pushed out of their homes in 1948 upon the founding of the State of Israel, most of those Palestinians stayed in the Arab world, and they are the same Palestinians and their descendants who are living in these refugee camps in surrounding countries that surround Palestine. Some of those folks also ended up in Europe, Latin America, and other places. The majority who came to the States came after 1967. And immediately upon coming here after 1967, because, as I mentioned earlier, the PLO was the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and was functioning as our sole legitimate representative across the world, the PLO was also functioning in the United States. So people from the communities, the Palestinian communities, were working with communities like this one, and Black and Latino and Puerto Rican and Mexican and other communities to build support for the Palestinian liberation movement, to build solidarity amongst oppressed communities and others in this country, and build support for the fight against U.S. imperialism and Israeli occupation. And ever since that work started in the United States, the FBI infiltration, the FBI repression started as well. The first prominent case of repression against the Palestinians is the case of the Los Angeles 8, the LA 8. 7 Palestinians and the Kenyan wife of one of them were originally arrested under something called the McLaren-Walter Act, which, they were arrested for espousing the viewpoint of world communism. Now, when that was considered a violation of the First Amendment, that was thrown out, and then they were charged with supporting a terrorist organization at the time, the PFLP in Palestine. Now, the LA 8 did nothing but distribute educational literature. For 20 years, the 7 Palestinians and the Kenyan woman, for 20 years, they were in deportation proceedings. The case went to the Supreme Court once. It went to a number of higher appeals courts, at least 4 or 5 times. It was in deportation proceedings and ICE court, well, the precursor to ICE courts for 2 decades before finally, a judge threw out the deportations, allowed these people to apply for permanent residence here, and said that everything that they had done when they were originally charged and originally arrested was protected by the First Amendment. 20 years of harassment, 20 years of dealing with the not knowing whether you're going to have to leave your children because you're going to get deported, only because they're Palestinian and fighting for Palestinian rights. Sami Abudayyeh, who in my opinion is one of the most egregious cases of prosecutorial and court misconduct. The prosecution and the judges in this case, really, it's incredible what happened there. He was acquitted of charges related to terrorism after 5 years in prison and an 8-month trial. He was acquitted of all charges related to terrorism. He was convicted of helping somebody apply for a green card who wasn't eligible. That's what he was convicted of. So the judge, and he had been in prison for 5 years, mind you, the judge decided that he was not going to accept the recommendation of the prosecution to let him go home. And he said, I don't care what the jury said, and I don't care that the jury acquitted you, I'm going to keep you in. And he kept him in prison. He gave him a sentence higher than he was supposed to have given him for that charge. So the deal, so he made a plea deal. Sami Abudayyeh, who had been in the country for 20 years, who had raised all of his children in the United States, decided that he did not want to fight any longer. He had already been fighting for 5, 6, 7 years. He knew he would have to fight and stay in prison for another 3, 4, or 5. He said, I'm going to make a plea deal. I'm going to accept voluntary departure. Even though he's what we call, the Palestinians call stateless Palestinian. He doesn't have a passport. Jordan, Egypt, anywhere. So he has no idea where he would be deported to. Israel wouldn't let him go to Palestine. We have no guarantee that the Egyptians would take him. We have no guarantee that the Jordanians would take him. But he accepted the voluntary departure anyway. Imagine how devastated him and his family must be to have done that. So what happened is, then the U.S. attorney decides that they were going to call him to a grand jury after he made the plea deal. He refused to testify to the grand jury. He was charged. He's being charged right now. They're deciding whether they're going to charge him with criminal contempt. And while he's waiting to be charged for criminal contempt, he's still on house arrest and he can't leave his home. The other important thing to know about Sami's case, and for those of us that do this work, we know how closely connected the Israeli intelligence forces are with the U.S. intelligence forces. But 80 Israelis testified against Sami Abudayyeh in the United States. The vast majority of those Israelis were not known to the defense, to Sami or his attorney, and the vast majority of the evidence was secret and was kept from the defense. Sami Abudayyeh did not call one single witness in his defense. His whole defense was based on his First Amendment rights, and he won the case and he was acquitted. And so that judge and that U.S. attorney, what they did was nothing but punitive. It was nothing but trying to punish this Palestinian for being a Palestinian and for fighting for his people's rights. It's the most egregious case, and people need to know about it, and they need to try to support him and his family. Another one that I keep thinking Sammy's more egregious, and then I'm wondering if the Salah case is worse, and Abdul Halim al-Ashqar, and it's really incredible what is happening to the people in the community. And these are prominent organizers and activists too. We're not even talking, that's a whole nother presentation to talk about these young men in New York who are being entrapped, or the 83,000 who were called to special registration proceedings after September 11th to be fingerprinted and interviewed and photographed to find out where the Arabs and the Muslim men are in this country. That's why they did special registration. That's all it was. Or the 5,000 that were interviewed by the FBI, or the 600 that were picked up and deported within weeks of September 11th. Not one of that close to 90,000 Arab and Muslim men, not one has been convicted of a crime related to terrorism, not one. And you talk about witch hunts, and you talk about casting a wide net. Muhammad Salah and Abdul Halim al-Ashqar, the original charges for material support were thrown out within a few months. Instead, they were charged with racketeering under RICO charges, racketeering and conspiracy. The conspiracy as members of alleged members of Hamas, that was a conspiracy, and being alleged members of Hamas was also a criminal conspiracy, and it was a racketeering charge. So that's what they were facing. Now, the evidence that they used to even bring those charges were secured by torture when the Israelis tortured Muhammad Salah and forced him to sign a confession. He signed the confession in Hebrew, a language that he doesn't read or write. So after weeks of torture, he signed a confession in Hebrew. He spent 5 years in prison for that alleged crime in Israel, in an Israeli prison, and then came to the United States only to get charged here. Him and Abdul Halim al-Ashqar got charged. The attorneys from the People's Law Office, who are our attorneys, were their attorneys in that case, did a fantastic job. The community came out and supported both of these men incredibly every single day for months and months and months, and they were acquitted by a jury of their peers in Chicago. And then what happened? Somebody take a guess. The U.S. attorney came back and called Ashqar to a grand jury, and Ashqar refused to testify to the grand jury, and he was convicted of criminal contempt and is serving 11 years in prison right now. So understand, Abdul Halim al-Ashqar, we did a brave thing. I believe that it's brave to say that you're not going to testify to the grand jury. And Ashqar took it one step further. He said, I'm not going to the grand jury because I know they're going to ask me about my family in Palestine. And I know they're going to ask me about my colleagues in Palestine. And I know they're going to ask me about my neighbors in Palestine. And because we know that the U.S. intelligence services work so closely with the Israelis, that whatever happens in that grand jury and whatever I testify to there is going to lead to a home demolition and an arrest and a possible assassination in Palestine, and I could never do that. And he's spending 11 years in prison because of that. And then a simple case of, brave 18-year-olds at Irvine, University of California, Irvine. 11 of them who were convicted. I never even heard of this. Misdemeanor accounts of, no, I've heard of it, but listen to the charge. Conspiracy to disrupt a meeting. And disrupting a meeting. That's what they were charged and convicted of, because Michael Oren, the U.S. ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., was getting up and spewing more propaganda and Israeli lies, and these students got up, as is their right of academic freedom on a campus in the United States of America in 2012, and get up and challenge these lies, and they were convicted of what doesn't even sound like a crime. This is what students, Palestinian and Solidarity students across the country are facing every single day. Palestinian students and Solidarity students, and Students for Justice in Palestine, Muslim student associations, and all these other organizations across the country. This is what prominent and not so prominent leaders in the Palestinian and Arab and Muslim community and Muslim communities are facing every single day. Infiltration in our mosques and our churches and our community centers. It's not just faith institutions. Al-Auda, the most secular of organizations in New York, was infiltrated by the NYPD as well last year. There's FBI and NYPD collusion that we know about that leads to the entrapment of all of these young men, mentally challenged and otherwise, in New York over the months. And it really is taking up most and sometimes all of our resources to be defending these people, to be supporting them and their families, to be taking us away from the day-to-day organizing for the liberation of Palestine. That's the reason they do it. That's the reason they're attacking us. And that's the reason we need your continued support and solidarity to not only end the investigation against us, but to continue to be proactive in our organizing going forward. And I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of positive discourse in terms of the other reason why we're being attacked, the reason why social justice movements are attacked is what we talked about earlier: impactful, effective work. And there is impactful, effective work happening in this country. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is taking its toll on Israel. There is incredible legal work being done right now, especially in Europe, but there are people in the States who are talking about it as well, to charge Israeli government and military leaders with war crimes because of their violations in Lebanon in 2006 and Gaza in 2008 and 2009. Ehud Olmert, former prime minister, decided he was going to try to give a speech at the University of Chicago in 2011. And the Students for Justice in Palestine and folks from USPCN and other community members decided he was not going to give that speech. And so we went to the University of Chicago, and every 2 minutes when he tried to get back on the mic, somebody else got up and disrupted him. And they did that continuously for 20 minutes until he finally turned around and walked off the stage. And then he traveled to San Francisco, and we called the folks there and said, hey, this is what we did, why don't you try it? And they went to a hotel, and every 2 minutes they got up and they disrupted his speech there until he turned around and he walked off the stage. On Monday, an officer of the Israeli occupation forces who was the legal advisor to the IOF in the Gaza Strip. So the person who said, you know what, it might not be legal under international law to assassinate people with drones in Gaza, and it might not be legal to drop missiles on civilians there, and it might not be legal to kill 1,400 Palestinians in a month and a half in 2008 and 2009. But you know what? I'm your legal advisor, and I say do it anyway. He's coming to the University of Chicago on Monday, and we're going to be greeting him in that classroom as well. Israeli military and government officials, everywhere that they go in Europe, and everywhere that they go in Latin America, and everywhere that they go in the United States, the anti-Zionist forces and the Palestinian community forces are there to greet them at every turn, and we will continue to do that. Yeah. Longshore workers in Northern California a year and a half ago, together with the United States Palestinian Community Network, shut down a port in Northern California and wouldn't allow a ship with Israeli products in.
All right.
At Hampshire College, the first campus in this country to totally divest from Israel, a monster victory in the divestment campaign, and folks from Hampshire College are traveling around the country talking to people on other campuses, University of Michigan, at Berkeley, a couple campuses in Chicago and other places, to look to see if we can replicate that divestment on other campuses as well. Israeli products have been taken off the shelves of co-ops in Washington State and other places. We won a referendum at DePaul University in Chicago to get sabra hummus off the shelves. We weren't able to implement it because the total number of votes weren't enough under the rules of the campus, but we won by about 40% in terms of the referendum itself. Ahavas Dead Sea products are being taken off shelves on the East Coast and other places because of some great work in New York by the community and Solidarity Forces. And you know, we don't come up with all the ideas ourselves. Our friends in South Africa instituted a cultural and academic boycott a few years back in the probably the most inspiring struggle that most of us in this room have been a part of, if we were. And so we decided we were going to steal that idea, and now we have a boycott of academic and cultural Israeli academic and cultural institutions, and people, prominent musicians and artists and actors in the United States have picked up that call, including the late Gil Scott-Heron, Carlos Santana, the Pixies, Meg Ryan, Dustin Hoffman, Pete Seeger, my personal favorite, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, and many, many others. And I think we end these presentations on this positive note, and we talk to folks across the country, because every city and town and locality has a target that they can find. This morning I spoke to Middle East Peace Now at a library somewhere. Edina. And they were talking about SodaStream campaign against SodaStream. You know, and I'm really, really hopeful that folks from the Anti-War Committee, Minnesota Break the Bonds, Middle East Peace Now, the Coalition for Palestinian Rights, that folks can get together and really target one of these Israeli companies or one of these American companies that are investing in Israel, and come up with a BDS, a component of a BDS campaign as soon as possible. And the other thing we're doing, and we want you to help us do too, is to continue to chase Fitzgerald and Jonas around. Barry Jonas on March 12th, as I mentioned, is going to be teaching a class in Chicago, and we're going to greet him there. Fitzgerald, who resigned as the U.S. Attorney, who was the initiator of this investigation, we believe, I think he's running for something, because he's getting awards left and right from different law schools, and every time he goes somewhere we do a picket, and we do a call-in day to the dean there saying that a violator of civil liberties, somebody who's been proven to be anti-Arab and anti-Muslim and anti-civil liberties his entire career, should not be getting any awards from any law schools anywhere. That's the kind of work that we need to continue to do, and to demand publicly that this investigation ends against us, that we're publicly exonerated, but more than that is that there is a general end of repression against people in the Palestinian community and people in other social justice movements, an end to FBI infiltration, an end to surveillance, an end to informant use. And I know that not only are we going to be exonerated, but the Palestinian people will win their liberation, and we will win social justice in this country. Thank you very much.
Yeah! Our good friend Meredith Abbey from the Anti-War Committee, who also went on the famous no-eating trip in 2002. And we can talk about that later after the more serious part of this discussion happening. But Meredith has a few points for us before we start the discussion. And I'm sure you have a lot, because Hatem presented us with a lot of really thoughtful things to a lot of insightful things, which, you know, like I've talked about him, as he said, for over 10 years, and I've been trying to get him here since 2002, and he keeps on saying that it's too cold, and then he comes in February, so I have no idea what he's doing.
First off, if you are sitting next to an empty chair, can you raise your hand so that people, okay, so we've got some. So if you are someone who doesn't have a chair, who wants a chair, you can see they're sprinkled throughout, and I'm not as important as Hatem, so I don't want you to feel like it would be rude to like go and sit in them, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. First off, I wanted to let people know that if during Q&A you don't get to have enough quality time with Hatem, that you have another opportunity to see him this evening. We're having a house party. You're all invited. It's going to be later on this evening from 7:30 to 10:30 at Justin and Steph Yorick's house, which is at 2911 Park. So again, at 2911 Park.
I have flyers I can pass around.
From 7:30 to 10:30. So if you wanted to get an opportunity to talk more with Hatem or to learn more about the Committee to Stop FBI Repression or the Anti-War Committee, we can take care of that. I want to thank everyone for coming. We had over 100 people who came to this event today.
All right.
I know that it was full this morning. So I feel like we made it worth Hatem's while, and Mother Nature cooperated, so that's good. I would like to encourage people to make a donation today to the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, who fronted the money to pay for Hatem's airplane ticket. If you had the ability to write a check, you could write it just to the CSFR, if you didn't want to write out the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. We also accept cash. But the idea is that we want to put that money towards paying for Hatem's tour, as well as to continue our activism against political repression and in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And it would be great if people had the ability to give, and we've got 2 different buckets that are going around. Also, as you heard from Hatem, there's a lot of work to be done, right? And so I want to give people some suggestions for what you could do with that enthusiasm that hopefully you have after hearing Hatem. Many of you are here because you are already getting emails or phone calls, or both, from the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. We did a large local mailing, and so if you got a postcard from us, you are probably on our listserv that we have your contact information. If you didn't get a postcard from us, that is like clue number 1, that either we had your address and now you've moved, or you gave us your address and we couldn't read it, or you didn't give us your address and we should take care of that. Okay? So one of those things should happen. So I'll start this down over here, but if you can pass this along if you already got a postcard from us, because it means that we're good.
I already did.
Thank you. The next thing is that I got a lot of people to do it on their way in, but we had so many people. If I would have asked everybody on their way in, we'd still be working on it. But the Anti-War Committee has a new petition against U.S. military to Israel, and I'll also start this being passed around. It'd be great if you didn't sign our petition on the way in, if you could. Can you pass this to the gentleman in the hat, and Michael Kavlin will start it in the middle. Thank you. And on our way in, but we kept adding more chairs. Originally, we had one of these in everyone's chair, and now some of you didn't get one. So you could get one on the table on the way out, but the flyer that says Stop USA to Israel that has the peace sign on it, on the back it has the information for calling our brand new Secretary of State, John Kerry. Now this man has had this job for a very short period of time, and I don't think he's heard from us very much. And I think we need to educate him about our views. And I think that he does some things that are, and he's made it very clear that one of his first priorities is continuing and prioritizing the special relationship the United States has with Israel. And I think it's very important for us to tell him that we actually think that there should be a different set of prioritization, and that actually continuing U.S. aid to Israel is not what we should be doing. And there's also special information about the hunger strikers and calling, that when you call John Kerry to talk about how we should end U.S. aid to Israel, that also that you can talk about your solidarity with the hunger strikers, and that they should all be released, and that we should take a stand against Israeli political prisoners. As was mentioned, Hatem was talking about some of the different cases. One of the cases that the local Committee to Stop FBI Repression has been working on is solidarity for the Holy Land Five. The Holy Land Five is a group of people who, like us, have been, well, we haven't been formally accused, we've just been indirectly accused of material support for terrorism, and unfortunately they were formally accused I went to court and unfortunately lost, and some of them are serving 65 years for being in solidarity with the people of Palestine and sending things like, you know, school supplies to children on the West Bank. It's outrageous. And Jess, who's at the table in the back, has envelopes so people want, and addresses. So if people wanted to write letters, you could write them today, or you could just take a list of addresses from Jess. But we're really excited about our turnout that we have here today. We really would like it if everybody today could not just come to this event, but if people could take some sort of action, you know, and whether or not that's going to an upcoming protest, whether it's organizing your own house party, whether or not that's signing the petition, whether or not that's calling John Kerry. It would be great if we could let the powers that be know that we are concerned, as opposed to just coming here together. So we've taken a great step today, but it'd be great if we could keep that momentum going so that we could be further in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Thank you very much for coming.
All right, so just kind of start off, if people can raise their hands, I'll try to get to as many people as possible. If people can keep comments to about a minute or so. I know that there are a lot of comments, and because of, you know, like both repression as well as, you know, Palestine, there's, you know, like it's very, it makes people angry. Yes.
How and why does U.S. imperialism operate through Israel, and why is the Israeli society becoming so much more right-wing?
Hopefully.
I mean,
in 1 minute, please.
I've known the man for 10 years, it's not possible.
Repeat the question.
oh, how does U.S. imperialism work through its proxy Israel, and why has Israeli society become so right-wing? Well, I think it's important. There's still some confusion about the relationship between the United States and Israel, and I think not maybe everybody in this room understands that relationship and is not confused about it. But there are others outside of here who believe that it's Israel that dictates U.S. foreign policy, and it's Israel that controls the decisions from Washington. And so I think the main there's a perfect example that happened within the last couple of years that tells you exactly why the United States supports Israel, exactly why Israel is the U.S. proxy in the Arab world, which is the uprisings in the Arab world. The United States must have known and must have anticipated that ultimately, at some point, that the Egyptian people, a very strong workers' movement, a very highly educated community, the largest of the Arab countries, was going to rise up and kick their puppet Mubarak out of the country. They knew that ultimately that was going to happen, and it is the reason why Israel was established there to begin with by the British and by the United States, to make sure that, you know, aspirations for the freedom for the Arab peoples would be controlled, whether U.S. does it directly themselves, like the war and invasion in Iraq, or whether they have Israel do its dirty work, the occupation of Palestinian land, the control of their border with Egypt, with Syria, with Lebanon. That's the role that Israel plays for the U.S., for U.S. imperialism in the Arab world. The question of the move towards the right of Israel in Israeli society, I mean, I don't really have a very, you know, a perfect explanation for that. What I do know is that, you know, the more Israel and Israelis, the government and its people, believe that they are being threatened by the Palestinian fight for and struggle for national liberation, the more they believe that the Palestinians are winning, the more repression and the more that Israeli society itself becomes concerned for its own existence. Now, Israel always talks about the existential question about the character of what they call this Jewish state, that we can't allow the right of return because we will no longer be a Jewish state. I have no interest in whether or not Israel is going to remain a Jewish state. That shouldn't be an important factor to anybody who cares about the legitimate aspirations, aspirations for freedom and liberation for all of the people in the region. It does not make life for Israelis better or easier that their government continues to impose apartheid-like conditions on the Palestinian people. And it's not new. All of a sudden you got younger academics and writers and folks who are talking about the one-state solution because two states is no longer viable. We talked about the chopping up of the West Bank and what Bennett and what Israelis have been doing for years, and it's no longer viable, so the only solution is a one-state solution. Well, no, that didn't just come up out of thin air. That is a solution that has been recommended and suggested for the conflict for decades. And it comes from the Palestinian and Arab left, and it comes from the understanding that we can live in one country together as long as there is economic justice and social justice for all the people living there in that one country together. I believe unabashedly in the destruction of the State of Israel. What I mean when I say the destruction of the State of Israel is not what they claim that Palestinians mean when we say it. I'm not advocating for the destruction of the Israeli Jewish people. I'm not advocating for the destruction of the European Jewish people who have colonized Palestine. What I'm saying is a racist, colonialist, apartheid state has no right to exist. Yeah. And I say that unabashedly. And we can live in harmony and in peace with everybody in those borders as long as people have full equality.
Maybe you can address one of the things with the right of return that I've always thought was interesting, that people in the U.S. who were born and raised in the U.S., if they have a letter from their rabbi, they could move to Israel, become citizens. But Palestinians have been fighting for the right of return, and that's always been a question, and I think you addressed that with the case around Samuel Arian. And aside from the injustice of his case, the fact that he doesn't have citizenship if they go through the deportations, can you address the right of return a little bit more and what that entails?
Yeah, I mean, what you described is what the Israelis call the law of return, which means that any American Jew, any Ethiopian Jew, any Romanian Jew, anybody who practices the religion of Judaism anywhere in the world can move to Palestine and live on the land that used to belong to Palestinians. And someone like my father, who was born and raised there, when he goes back, he has to get a visa that says that you have to leave in 3 months. And he can't stay and live on his land unless he stays there for, I think the policy is like 7-8 years consecutively without leaving. So there's obviously something inherently wrong there. And the other aspect of it is not just to say this is what the Israelis allow for Jews from anywhere in the world, and this is what they disallow for Palestinian Muslims and Christians. More than that is an issue of practicality. The argument from the Israelis is always, how can we allow 5 million Palestinians to come back to Palestine? And the first argument that they make there, which is that it would, forever change the character of the state, as I mentioned earlier, I don't really care about that argument. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in anybody telling me that this has to stay a Jewish state. The character of the state must stay Jewish, that it has to be a religious state. I have no interest in that argument. The other argument is it's just not practical. There's not enough space, there's not enough land, there's not enough economy, there's not enough irrigation, there's not enough any of that stuff. But folks should look at studies that have been done about this. Two things that you should look at. Studies by Hatem Abudayyeh, who has been doing research for 30 years about the practicality of the right of return. And he proves every single acre of Palestinian land in historical Palestine that it is practical and people could return if the right was implemented. The other thing they should say is, why is it that when Sharon was the defense minister and the prime minister, he pushed through the Knesset a plan to move 1 million Ethiopian Jews into Palestine in a 10-year period, but he's saying that we can only bring, allow maybe 10, maybe 20,000 Palestinians. It's not an accurate argument, and we sometimes we just need to get better educated in terms of how to respond to the argument. Hatem Abudayyeh helps with that, and it also helps to say that we don't believe in a religious state.
You talked about efforts to unify Palestinian organizations, Hamas and the PLO. It's kind of optimistically, I thought. And one thing I've noticed from afar, they held pro-PLO demonstrations in Gaza and pro-Hamas demonstrations in the West Bank, which in the past probably have led to clashes. Anyway, could you expand a little more on that effort to unify?
First of all, I think it's important that we, the question is in regards to what I was describing earlier in terms of the working to unify the disparate political organizations and forces in Palestinian society, most specifically Hamas and what Joe described as the PLO. I think it's important, first of all, to make sure that we're using, our nomenclature is correct. The issue is not PLO versus Hamas. If we're talking about the two main forces, the ones that are in some level of political contradiction with each other right now, we're talking about Hamas and Fatah. The PLO is a different entity. Now, has the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Fatah and its leadership sometimes used their chairmanship of the executive committee of the PLO to their benefit in terms of saying we are a representative of this PLO and the PLO is the sole legitimate representative of everybody? Yes, that may have happened. That happened in Arafat's days a lot. It's happened, Mahmoud Abbas has done it as well, that sort of thing. But the PLO, if we're going to say PLO, we have to understand the PLO is made up of more than just the PA and more than just Fatah. So what I'm describing is a reformed PLO. What I believe is that people are working towards is a reformed PLO, which would include not only Hamas and Fatah, but as I mentioned earlier, the left forces in Palestine, the Islamic Jihad, and all the other, civil society organizations that were always a part of the PLO in the past, when it was the legitimate and sole representative of the Palestinian people. Those conversations are happening between the main forces, and diaspora communities are talking very seriously about reinstituting and reforming the Palestinian National Council. The National Council is the legislative body in exile, which means there are conversations even in the United States about electing members to the Palestinian National Council. The idea is if you elect members to a PNC in the US and in Germany and in Ecuador and in Nigeria, that reinstituted PNC will ultimately move into a reinstituted PLO body. So it's a complex issue, the complex conversations, but the reason why I believe that we're moving forward and we're moving in that direction is because I think that the majority of the Palestinian people are saying that the PA really does not represent me any longer, and maybe has not represented me in a long time. And if that's what they feel, then they want to be represented by the body that was truly representative of all Palestinians.
Mike?
Oh, okay. First of all, by the way, America is itself a racist settler state, so that must be said.
Right.
And I'd like to ask you, as a very proud American Irish Republican, who actually currently has a cousin right now in Montgomery political prisoner camp, I was just a little insulted that you didn't mention the Irish struggle as you talked about solidarity. I'm having fun, obviously.
He did.
But, oh, actually I didn't hear that then. Okay. I'd like to ask you, have you ever, as you go across the country, have you found that you ever have any problems, like you have sometimes here, with those of us who talk about the Democratic Party's open, naked complicity in the FBI repression, Palestine, Israel, et cetera, that you have voices that will maybe tell you to not say that and be quiet, which does happen in this state.
I mean, I don't think there's any, voices directly, explicitly saying, don't say that, be quiet, but we've all worked in coalitions on different issues across communities, across issues, across the years, in which you are dealing with some folks who you build united fronts with at times, and you can't build united fronts with at other times. Are there apologists in the Palestinian community for the president and the Democratic Party? No. Are there apologists in the Palestinian solidarity community for the Democratic Party and for the president? Yes. Are there what we would consider soft, what we call soft Zionists, those American Jews and American non-Jews who support the right of Israel to exist, support the fact that it needs to be secure the way the U.S. government always talks about it, and who work very closely with the DP and the president and the White House? Yeah, I mean those folks are around. I think that those voices are getting, at least in the Palestine context, more and more delegitimized over the years. That's just my unscientific, anecdotal take.
Thank you.
Yes.
You spoke about Palestinians that feel not represented by the PA anymore. I'm interested in more about this debate. As I understand, in 2011, we saw youth movements in March, refugees marching towards the borders in June, and so on, with the demand for unity, but with a new kind of feeling that they are not represented by the old organizations, mainly Fatah and Hamas. And there's a search for a new strategy. And as I understand, with the strike in last September, the transport workers striking in the West Bank, spreading really a kind of general strike, public sector workers. This was, of course, directly linked against the occupation, the Paris Accord, Israeli economy dominating the West Bank, but this was also linked against the neoliberal policies implemented by the PA, where more and more people feel like the PA as a kind of arm almost of the Israeli occupying regime. And these debates about the strategy to break with neoliberal policies, to break with capitalist policies, I think this is a debate which is really essential. I mean, this is not to split the movement. I'm really in favor, and I think the movements were in favor of unity against the Israeli occupation. But the whole debates about anti-capitalist policies, socialist policies, I think they are coming up in these movements from below, inspired by the Arab Spring. And I think this is a really crucial and important debate we've got to engage.
I agree. I have to be honest, like I uphold and, you know, and support self-determination first and foremost more than anything else. Those are the debates that we're having in the Palestinian community. You know, my criticism of the PA, the Palestinian forces who are debating and discussing and struggling for unity and all that sort of thing, that happens in those Palestinian spaces, and that's where they are happening.
Yes, Eric.
Hatem, thank you so much for coming to the Twin Cities and making that big drive between Chicagoland and here. I just wanted to...
We'll thank the unionized pilots.
Excellent. You mentioned earlier in your discussion about the cultural and academic boycott. I think it's PAC-B.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was wondering if there's also, like, you know, there are boycotts and there are also like boycotts. Is there like any kind of movement towards supporting cultural activity? I'm asking this question on the eve of the Oscars and knowing that at least one good Palestinian film is up for an Academy Award. But is there some kind of movement towards supporting cultural and academia supportive of Palestinians?
Yeah, I don't know that for sure. If the other Palestinians in the room or anybody else who might be able to answer that better, you know, should feel free. I do know that when Ramadan of last year, I think I don't fast, so I get mixed up with the holidays. But Ramadan of last year, there was a boycott of Israeli dates, and at the same time, as you mentioned, the boycott, that there was a push, a national push in the U.S. Folks from AMP, I think, are here, American Muslims for Palestine, who I think led that campaign, where we were pushing people to buy the dates from the Palestinian companies. But in terms of the cultural an academic aspect of it, I mean, it's a great question, and I wish I knew. I couldn't tell you.
You have, Hussein, do you want to address that at all?
Well, this is your day, I guess, but I have a question. I wanted to ask a question. And honestly, I thought when you did not feed the arm for 17 hours, I thought you were fasting. So we have to quote this negative propaganda about the generosity. Brother Hatem, my question is, you talked about the importance, and not necessarily the difference, but the focus of some other Palestinian organizations working here in the United States. Is there any, or if you could tell us about if there's any discussion going on among Palestinian organizations to really develop a narrative to the Palestinian cause without looking or seeming as contradictory or opposing, or because, you know, hear all these questions about Hamas, but all other organizations, or how important that is to you. As far as I think your answer was good about that date, and it was during Ramadan, so I agree.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are three main national Palestinian organizations in the United States. There's the American Muslims for Palestine, there's the United States Palestinian Community Network, and there's the Palestinian American Council. Now, those three organizations represent three political trends in the Palestinian polity. I mean, it's clear, like, we don't exist in a vacuum here, with some of the same issues that are being dealt with around unity conversations and political contradictions and even ideological differences and that sort of thing in Palestine are in existence here. I don't think they manifested themselves in the same way maybe that they do in Palestine, and in fact, what I know as being one of the National Coordinating Committee members of USPCN is that we work very, very closely with AMP, and we've done projects together. In Chicago, I mean, they're the first people we call, and we're the first people they call whenever we're going to do any work together. So, listen, there's something in Arabic called thawabit. Thawabit means the things that cannot be changed. And in the Palestinian national movement, we have thawabit. The vast majority of the Palestinian people believe in these thawabit. The right of return, end of occupation, self-determination, and support for the resistance. If we're going to have challenges with each other around tactics, around strategies and all that sort of thing, that's natural and that's welcome, and we have those conversations. But, the majority of us believe in the right of return, end of colonization and occupation, self-determination, and because we do, we're able to move forward in the United States and work together pretty well. So I think that does happen.
I see people kind of bundling up, so I'm going to have two more questions. I'm going to encourage any women in the room to ask a question, but I see one man. So, all right, I see two women, so I'm going to have three more questions. And I will start, actually, I'm going to let you later.
Okay.
And Kate in the back row.
I just wanted to know if you had any comments or updates on folks going to Gaza with material support.
Good luck.
All right. No, this is what I'll say. Actually, this is what we've been saying in general. Gaza or the West Bank or anywhere else that we it might be described as a conflict zone. After the raids, and after it became clear that they were probably looking at material support, and after it became clear that they were probably looking at HLP versus Holder, organizations across the country who also organize delegations were all asking those questions. And from the American Friends Service Committee to the Brennan Center to other faith-based organizations and institutions, people were really, really concerned about their work, knowing what it is that it looked like they were targeting us for, which was educational delegations and the studying of certain conditions in occupied lands and other conflict zones. And what we were telling people, and the other folks who are part of CSFR should chime in if they want, but what we were telling folks is you really should talk to the best people to give the best answers in this situation, the National Lawyers Guild people especially, and ask them what they think about it before you organize a delegation. I don't know who's getting into Gaza these days. I know that people individually are able to get in a little bit. In terms of delegations, in terms of organizations, in terms of humanitarian aid and institutions, I think that's very, very, very difficult these days. And I think you really, really need to have some legal advice before you organize delegations. I think it's an important thing to say. It's a sad thing for me to say, and I don't want to say it because I want people to do delegations and continue their work, but I think it's important to say. But if anybody else from CSFR wants to comment on that, they should.
First of all, thank you for coming. I've learned so much from you.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about two-state versus one-state solutions, and I would love to hear you talk a little more about that. And I go back to American history. After the Civil War here, inside the South, and coming out of there, there was a tremendous amount of violence against black people, which has gone on and on and on. Now, I don't mean to insult anybody on either side in Palestine, but that's not an area that's overflowing with brotherly love between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So, I wonder then, if you had a one-state solution, would there not be a lot of this sort of leftover residual ongoing violence on both sides? Everybody's human. Lord knows there's enough blame to go around for everybody. And so would it mayhap not be more conducive to a more peaceful solution to have a two-state solution?
Are we gonna have another event?
I've just been sitting here thinking about this.
Yeah, well, you should ask that first, not last.
It took me a while to think it through. Please, talk to us.
No, I mean, listen, you know,
I keep telling you, you should have come earlier.
If anybody believes that the Palestinians would have sovereignty on a state of their own today, that they would have control over land, that they would have control over air, that they would have control over water, that they would have control over electricity, that they would have an army, that they would be able to secure their own borders, that they would be able to do all of those things. That's what you need for a state. None of that can happen. None of that is allowed right now by the Israelis and the Americans. None of it. Not one of those elements. So there ain't no state for the Palestinians. That's, you know, the wrapping up answer to a question, a very difficult, challenging one like that one.
Great answer.
Can I just request that someone maybe, I know of a brand new natural product shop that's selling what you referred to, the Dead Sea products.
Ahava.
I mean, he's a great guy. He's just started this natural product shop. Anybody can work with me or talk to me about that in Minneapolis.
There we go.
We'll have announcements a little bit later on, and we have somebody from the best boycott divestment who's going to be making an announcement. So we'll have information about that. But last question, and then we'll have a couple announcements, and then people can try to grab Hatem before we make him go away to have some more food, and then the party. So yes.
Yeah, my question is, with the foundation of the completely blind support of Israel being in the Christian community here in America, when I watch YouTube videos and things and news reports out of Palestine and the treatment of the Palestinians, I'm always like, you know, if ones that happen to be Christians or non-Muslims were, you know, pointed out so that the Christians saw that, hey, wait a minute, they're not just going after the Muslims, those terrorists naturally born, they're going after actually Christians too. I think that could put some big cracks in the foundation of the completely blind support that we see of Israel in America.
You know, if you can look at a Palestinian and tell me by looking at her,
yeah, but I mean,
if she's Christian or Muslim, that would be a pretty impressive thing. But I understand.
But whenever,
whenever
someone knows,
the point is that there are Christian organizations in the United States who work very closely with the Christian institutions and the churches in Palestine. There are people who are doing that work. Sabil is one of them. folks from a number of denominations who are really challenging their congregations to rethink how they're dealing with Israel. Presbyterians came to a divestment vote recently, and there are great leaders in the Presbyterian community who have been doing Palestine support work for years and years and years, and that's all they do, is talk to their denominations and other Christian denominations across the country about what's happening to Palestinian Christians and Muslims as well. So, you know, it's not an incorrect strategy. I believe it's being done, and I think we need to support those organizations that are doing that.
I literally have been trying to get Hatem here since 2002, and I'm so glad that CSFR has been able to get him here. And I can attest to the fact that Hatem has been working tirelessly on the issue of Palestine. Whether it's 2 in the morning or 8 a.m., he's going to 1 or 2 meetings at the same time. Before people leave, I just want to make sure people hear of a couple of events that are coming up. On Friday, 2 weeks from now, March 8th, is International Women's Day. Freedom Road Socialist Organization here in this very space, so you know where you are. You can come back here for a movie with Babies and Manners, story of Women's Emergency Brigade, and it's at 6:30 p.m. So please come to this if you can. There's more flyers. I think there are flyers actually on your chair, so please come. And child care is provided and refreshments will be served, so please come back. And also Saturday, March 30th is Land Day. So 5 broken cameras, a film and discussion. So please come here for that. And there's flyers. What?
Mayday Books.
Mayday Books, yes. Different location, but a place that people will be very familiar with in the Cedar Riverside area. I think it's 3-something Cedar Avenue, but anyways, Cedar Riverside. And then also Sylvia from Minnesota Break the Bonds has an announcement about the Divestment Day Logging Day. So
yeah, I'm Sylvia Schwartz. I'm with the Minnesota Break the Bonds campaign, and this is the D part of BDS, the divestment. We're trying to get Minnesota to divest from the Israel bonds that it holds. And so if there is anybody in this room who has not already signed our postcards, we take these to the legislators, and I'd love to have your signatures on the back. Come and see me after this. Also, on March 6th, we're going to have a day on the Hill, and that is where we're going to go to the SBI meeting. That's the State Board of Investment meeting, and demand that they divest from Israel bonds. And so we're trying to get as many people there as possible. So please come to the Capitol at 9 o'clock for the SBI meeting on March 6th.
do you need people to register or?
No.
Okay.
No, just come.
All right, cool.
There will be signs. People can come in. Let us know if you want to speak, because there's always a chance for the public to speak. So if you want to speak there, let us know.
Okay. Next CSFR meeting, do you call the date?
The third Thursday of the month here.
All right. And
7 p.m.
All right. Grace from SDS.
Hi everybody, I'm Grace. I'm from Students for Democratic Society, and I'm also with the Women's Student Activist Collective at the U of M. And I just wanted to make sure that we thank Seward Cafe and Michelle Spivey for providing the cookies. And one of my organizations, Women's Student Activist Collective, provided the coffee, and we're actually also having an International Women's Day event on March 7th. That's Thursday night at 5:30 p.m. in Flagan. I'm sorry I don't have flyers with me. Maybe Michelle does. Yes.
Flagan Hall.
Yeah, at Flagan Hall at the University of Minnesota on the West Bank.
It's very close to Minneapolis.
Yes. And so if you come that night at 5:30, you'll also get to hear On Speak Again.
Hi, I'm with the Palestinian American Society of Minnesota. We have an event on March 30th at 6:30 at the Crown Plaza Hotel for Land Day. We'll have a special speaker, Hatem Abudayyeh. If you ever heard of her, she will be here. She's from Playground for Palestine. She will have she will sign books. She will talk about her her new novel. I think Janine. I'm not sure about it, but and she will be around in town for about I think 1 day or so. So we will welcome you at that event. Thank you.
Well, on the lighter side of the Palestinian issue, today I'm wearing the Al-Aqsa Institute hat. I invite you all on April 6th, we have a Palestine Day. Some of you probably have been there. It's really a full day of, as I said, maybe a real small light presentation, but the rest of it is Palestinian folkloric dance, music, food, exhibits. That's April 6th, which it is a Saturday. Please check aqsamin.org. Aqsa, A-Q-S-A, not men versus women, M-N, Minnesota. So AQSAMN.org for more details. Thank you.
Thank you. We're good.
Yes.
For anybody that especially is around St. Paul on Friday, late afternoon, early evening, there's still a vigil that's going on. It's been going on for years and years. It's pretty much weekly. If it gets too cold, we few people that are out there tend to wimp out. But as we get further on into spring and warmer weather and you start feeling like being outside, hey, it's fun to be outside at Snelling and Summit Avenues. We're starting at 4:15.
We change it to 4:30.
And we usually have extra signs. So, hey, it's fun to hang out and enjoy the weather. And that's, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I was going to ask if anybody has a few extra minutes. I don't even know where all these chairs came from. I'm sure we're violating some sort of fire code. But we could use a few extra hands to figure out where to put them at.
If you have a black one, you could just stack it on top of another black one.
Okay.
That part I know the answer to.
Okay, thank you, everybody.